Hey everyone, hope you're doing well. Today I thought I'd take a look at a game between Magnus Carlsen playing against Tomaszewski in the World Blitz Championships in Berlin 2015. In this game Magnus was white and Tomaszewski was playing with the black pieces, and Magnus did indeed play the hillbilly attack against the Caro-Kann. So this goes as follows: e4 c6 for getting to a Caro-Kann, and Magnus whips out this move, bishop c4, the hillbilly attack. And already this is actually seen as an inaccurate move by white because black can play d5, which is what Tomaszewski played. But now the point is that you sack a pawn. Magnus plays bishop to b3. And the argument is that this bishop now is just really a powerful piece along this a2 to g8 diagonal. And at the expense of a pawn, white starts to build up a good attack. So in the game, Tomaszewski took the pawn, d takes e4. When someone plays a gambit against you, it's often said that you should take the pawn to try and refute the gambits, and this is what Tomaszewski goes in for. But now Magnus plays queen h5, the point of the hillbilly attack, hitting this f7 pawn with the bishop and the queen. Now there's been many tries here. I've actually seen Sam Williams play this opening a few times as well. One time his opponent actually played knight to h6, defending the f7 pawn this way with the knight, but it's not very good because white can play knight c3, try and win back that e pawn. And after bishop to f5 to protect, white's got the sneaky move, bishop takes f7, and after knight takes f7, queen takes f5. White's got exactly what they wanted. They've won the pawn back and absolutely messed up black's position. Another try here is also g6 to defend the pawn, and white should now play queen h4, attacking the pawn. After knight to f6 to defend, white plays knight c3, bishop f5 once again to defend the pawn, and white can go in for this idea, f3 takes, knight takes f3, bishop g7, followed by d4 castles and bishop to h6, where the knight can jump into g5, and the bishop on b3 is eyeing up this king on g8. Again, this bishop on b3 is incredibly powerful, and this is all at the expense of a pawn. So the idea is just basically build up some dynamic piece play and get a massive attack. But going back to this blitz game, Tomaszewski actually played e6 here to defend the f7 pawn. But this has a limitation. It really blocks in the c8 bishop, so we'll see what Magnus can do to exploit this. He first starts off with knight c3 to hit the e pawn. Tomaszewski plays knight to f6, protecting the pawn, attacking the queen, which drops back to h4. This is the typical square 8 jumps into in this opening. Black played knight b to d7. And here actually, instead of taking on e4, Magnus goes all in. So he plays f3, the typical move that the hillbilly players play. The point is, white gets rapid development if he take it, knight takes. White's already got 4 pieces out already. After bishop e7, castles, castles and d4, white's all ready to build up a massive attack. For instance, maybe they could drop the queen back to g3, they've got bishop h6 ideas, and I'm guessing just put the rook into the centre, and white's got a tremendous position. Okay, they're a pawn down, but their pieces are a lot better placed. I mean, this rook and this bishop aren't exactly doing very much. So white does have practical chances. However, black decided to play knight c5. I guess the idea here maybe is to try and whip off this bishop on b3, but at the moment also protects e4. So Magnus took on e4, the knight recaptured, and actually Magnus decided to swap queens off. And after king takes, knight takes, knight takes, Magnus just played d4. So here white is still a pawn down, but d4 was a good move. It limits the expansion of pushing this e pawn up the board, and still limits this bishop on c8. But we all know what Magnus is like, and this is a blitz game, so he obviously prefers queenless games. He's seen many times actually just dominating his opponents and winning in the endgame, so it's no surprise he goes in for this. Tomaszewski developed then bishop to b4 with check. Magnus blocked with c3. And there's a little trick here. If knight takes c3, it seems like the obvious move to play, because after b takes c3, bishop takes c3 with check, we're going to win the rook. However, after the knight takes c3, white can just play a3, hitting the bishop, and once it retreats backwards, play bishop d2. And black's actually lost a piece here, because they can't move the knight away, because it's pinned by this bishop. So c3 was played, and Tomaszewski saw this little tactic and just retreated his bishop back to d6. Magnus developed his knight to f3, and Tomaszewski put his pawn on f5, so protecting the knight on e4. Again, black's still a whole pawn up. However, moving your pawn to f5 may have weakened this e6 pawn slightly, and this is going to be Magnus's big target now. He continued on then, bishop to e3, the king went to c7 and Magnus castled queenside. There was bishop d7 to develop and just shoved his rook in the centre, eyeing up this pawn on e6. Black defends with his rook, and now bishop to c2, hitting the knight on e4. And so black pretty much has to move this knight back, otherwise he gets double pawns. And Magnus jumps his knight in to e5. And there's no way in hell black should take this knight off, because if takes, this just really helps white's position. This pawn on e6 is still weak, very backwards, and this bishop just completely blocked in. So even though white is a pawn down, they've got a very good position. Alright, so after knight to e5, black played rook to f8, and Magnus played g3, stopping the f4 pushes. The rook went to d8 for black, and now bishop to b3. So Magnus reroutes his bishop back to this square, again eyeing up the e6 pawn. Again, black just moved their rooks off the e-file, so this makes a lot of sense here. Bishop c8 is played, stopping any knight takes d7 ideas, and now just knight c4 though. So Magnus has another threat here. Knight takes d6, followed by bishop to f4, where white would have the two bishops. And Tomaszewski actually allows it in the game. Knight d5 is played. But after knight takes d6, black follows in with knight takes e3. And here Magnus actually missed a winning move here. He could have played knight takes b7 to win back his pawn. And after knight takes the rook, white can just play knight takes rook as well. After king takes d8, bishop takes d1. We're into a equal endgame where white's probably slightly better. They've won the pawn back and have a much better position. So back in the game after knight takes e3, obviously white can't play rook takes e3 because then king takes d6 is just good for black. But Magnus found sort of the second best move here, knight to b5 check. An intermezzo move, so after c takes b5, white's wrecked black's pawn structure ever so slightly, and Magnus plays rook takes e3, and now hitting this e-pawn again with the bishop and the rook. f4 is played by black. There's an exchange, and actually white wins back their pawn. But I think Tomaszewski wanted to go in for this because after bishop takes e6, he played rook e8 and basically just tried to trade off everything. So rook e1 by Magnus. Takes is played, rook takes, and rook takes. Rook f1, king to d2, a check, and then rook to e2, followed by a trade. So we're into a king and pawn endgame where white's actually got a slight advantage here due to the passed d-pawn being much further up the board than any other pawns. But black does have some counter-attacking chances by pushing these two pawns up. Play continued then, king d6 by black. Magnus played king to d3, king d5, and now b3, preparing maybe a4 or c4 here. b6 is played and Magnus does indeed play the move a. So after taking it, b takes a4. We're into a very complex king and pawn endgame, and here actually Tomaszewski should have played the move g6, because after c4, king e6, king e4, black can play g5, and after d5 check, king f6, king d4, and g4 a5, h5, takes. Black's got good chances to draw this game now due to the connected pawns on the g and h file. For instance, king e4, black can play h4, and after king f4 it's a draw due to g3, takes, and king to e5. And there's no way for the king to get back to defend these two pawns, and it's a drawn endgame. So it's very nuanced, this endgame, because actually Tomaszewski plays a losing move, a6. Magnus plays the correct move, c4. The king goes back to e6, the king goes to e4, and now Tomaszewski does play the move g6. But now Magnus is coming up the board with his pawns. d5 check, the king went to d6, and now Magnus actually missed a winning move. King f4 was actually the only winning move in this position, because after h6, the king can go back to e4, basically making black push their pawns up, a5 and wasting some tempos, and h3, the king goes back to d7 and white can play king e5, and after king e7, h4, g5, takes, king f5. There's no way for black now to destroy white's pawn structure because of this awkward b6 move that's already been played by black, so there's no b5 thrust anymore. Play continues on, king d6 takes, king c5 and king f4, and there's no way for black to win this because if they take, the pawn just runs up the board. However, in the game, Magnus actually played king to d4. And weirdly, this is actually a drawn position all of a sudden. If black plays king d7 now, then king e5, king e7, basically black just needs to hang around with the king and stop making pawn moves and wasting some tempos. For instance, if king e4, king d6, and if white plays h4, trying to entice black to move the pawns up, just h6, king f4, and just king e7. Basically, if black never moves these pawns up the board, there's no way for the white king to infiltrate. And if white ever plays a move like h5, then just g5, and it's probably still a draw. For instance, let's continue king e5, king d7. There's no real way for white to infiltrate this position. The point is as well that these two pawns are also ready to play this b5 thrust if need be. For instance, if king f6 here, I guess black can play g5, and after takes, king to d6, king to f5. Again, black's got this b5 idea, and after takes, there's no way for white to win this endgame. So this is a really hard position to defend as black though, but the idea that Tomaszewski should have gone for, move the king back and wait for this h6 idea. To be fair, in the game he did play h6 now, but this just loses to king e4, king d7, and now king e5, king e7, and now h3 instead of h4 as I showed in the previous variation. The point is now, let's say king d7 for black, white can play king f6, and after g5, white's still got this pawn in hand to stop any pushes from this pawn. So after g5, king to g6, king to d6, white can just hoover up these pawns, and they've still got past h-pawn. So yeah, this is actually a really complex pawn endgame. The tempos matter a lot here, so it's very tricky and very high end. But going back to the game, king e7 was played, h3, Tomaszewski played h5, and Magnus just played h4, and here black resigned the game. The point is now, white's got the opposition, and if, let's say, king f7, I guess white can just move the pawn up, and if king to d7, white can just play like king f6, king d6, and just take these pawns off, and white's got a 1 endgame. So that was an incredibly nuanced endgame. If you want to go through the game, I'll post a link in the description below. It's really worth taking a look at if you're interested in pawn endgames. But anyway, this was Magnus Carlsen winning with the hillbilly attack. And if Magnus decides to play it in a blitz game, maybe we should as well. It looks like it's a lot of fun. Anyway, thank you for watching. Please do drop a like, comment or subscribe to the channel. It really helps out. And hopefully you're all staying safe, and I'll see you soon.